So this past Wednesday, I helped my parents move. Yes, this has been a long process of getting out of this house, and we finally came to the very last possible day because the new tenants were moving in the next day. And for some context, my parents, I don't want to say they built the house because they didn't like pick up a hammer and make it, but they purchased this house to be built on this place when I was born. So they are the only people who have ever lived in this home, and they have lived in this home for 38 years. It has been the home in which they have raised their children, in which their children have gone off, in which 2/3 of their children have then come back and lived with them for some time, and then gone back out into their lives. There have been countless pets and parties, and it has just been... my house was kind of the space where friends gathered, where people gathered. My mom was that kind of person, is that kind of person who just wants to have people around her constantly. And so as I'm helping to clean out this house and seeing all of the empty rooms, my dad, who has no feelings, no, I kid. He's not sentimental in the least. He says, things are things, spaces are spaces. As long as I have my people, I'm fine. He said, but how are you doing? Are you feeling things? I didn't even bother to ask you. How is your emotions right now, Zack? This was your house. And I had to think about it because I was very conflicted. I had a lot of feelings. I moved out of that house 20 years ago, and my dad reminded me that as an 18-year-old with all of the spunk and rigor of an 18-year-old angsty boy, I said, you can do whatever you want with my bedroom. You don't need to keep it a shrine or anything, because once I'm out of here, I'm never coming back. And I didn't. I went off to college, and I didn't come back other than for summers for those first couple of years. And meanwhile, my two sisters did stay. They all stayed local. My little sister went through high school. My older sister got married and lived in their basement for a while before moving down the street. And four of them all kind of kept growing together while I grew separate. And when I would come back every year, I would be like a puzzle piece that didn't fit anymore. And every year I came back, I didn't fit a little bit more and a little bit more. And so over, I don't know, a year or two, probably, it no longer felt like my home. It felt like the home of one of my friends. You know, and those first couple of years away were completely transformative for me as a person. I changed, I shifted so much. I went through total breakdowns of self and then rebuilding. And so even Bordentown, New Jersey itself felt like the home of someone else. And I've been thinking a lot since then about the many Zacks that I've been and the many ways that I've chosen to define myself. And one thing that I've noticed is that when we explain our story to someone, especially like somebody we've just met, or I say, hey, tell me your life story right now, how we tell that story is always changing. And we are always reinterpreting our past based on who we are today or who we want to be today. So I would think when I was a little kid, if somebody said, well, who are you, little man? I would tell people that my dad was a professional guitar player and my mom was a nurse. My family has lived in Bordentown, New Jersey for like forever. And I have two very loud sisters, so I'm very quiet. That would be how I describe myself. Then as a teen, I would say that I was raised in a good, loving Christian home and that I was active in my Christian school and my church youth group. I'd say that my faith first became real to me at youth group one day when the youth pastor had us nail a nail into a cross to affirm that it was our very real sins that drove those very real nails in. I would say that I was a nice guy trying to bring back traditional Christian values. Then in my early 20s, like I said, I left home. I went away. I went 814 miles from home and went through a massive breakdown and realignment of all of my values. And with that, my creation story changed. I started telling people that I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family where I struggled with severe depression stemming from all the internalized self-loathing from my religious upbringing. I rarely remembered the joy and the love in those years. My current situation had changed, and I needed to reinterpret my origins in order to accommodate that, to help me explain why I am, and who I hope to be. And then sometime in my early 30s, my worldview shifted again. I became involved with racial justice work, started to really become aware of the social positions which had unknowingly shaped me. And then I would say things to people like, well, you know, as a straight, white, cisgendered, middle-class male who grew up in a homogeneous Christian bubble, insert statement here, you know. This was just another creation story, another framework that helped me to assemble, to explain who I was in that moment and what I hoped to become. And these days, I have become increasingly dissatisfied with my own creation stories, my own ways I have remembered and re-remembered and reinterpreted my past to explain my present. So I've been digging into some other cultures' creation myths. I love creation myths, by the way. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this. I have several books filled with creation myths. I think they are spectacular. They are fascinating because just like how we introduce ourselves by reinterpreting our own origin stories, a culture's creation story says more about the people who tell it than about the facts of the thing they're trying to explain. It says more about the culture and who they want to be than it does about the physicality of what happened in the past. Like America's creation myth is that we were founded by people fleeing religious and political persecution in order to create a free and just land filled with brave and independent explorers who would give their lives to defend the ideals of freedom, justice, innovation, and liberty. Right? Now, I mean, we all know, I am assuming everyone in this room knows that that is not historically accurate. But it's a true story nonetheless, because it provides a framework for our current ideals, even when we don't live into them. We are conveniently forgetting the times when we did not live into that and boosting up the times when we did in order to create a national creation myth. So what about the creation stories in Genesis 1 and 2 that Charlie read for us today? What do they tell us about the people who wrote them and the people who cling to their truths? Well, the Hebrew creation story, believe it or not, despite a lot of the commonalities, is actually incredibly unique among its neighbors. The creation stories among Israel's neighbors are all very violent. In one in particular, the god Marduk rips the god Tiamat in half and then uses her body to form the continents and then pulls from the blood on the ground, mixes it with dirt, and then makes humans out of the blood of his slain enemies in order to create a race of servants so that he and his fellow gods don't have to do any work. And then later, they got too noisy, and so he flooded them to kill them all. If you are a culture who is warlike, if you are a culture who traffics in humans, then your creation story is going to be warlike, and that devalues human life. Who you are today changes what you saw in the past. And then the stories you tell about yourself from the past change who you are today in a sort of cycle of sorts. And then we have the Hebrew people, a nomadic confederation of tribes without any mighty cities who are not yet practiced at war. They imagined a different sort of beginning. In their story, there is no resistance to creation. It flows freely from God's mouth like breath, like song. God looks out over the infinite nothingness and imagines and dreams its parts together, simply speaking them into existence. And God doesn't do this all at once, like in some creation myths. But God takes God's time. God speaks light, and then stands back and just delights in it for a while. God creates water, and then just stands back and goes, ooh, That's good. I'm going to just let that sit for a day. I just want to look at this for a while. You ever notice how in Genesis 1, how much God loves creation and how much God honors each and every individual part of it? There's no rushing God in Genesis 1. It's not like God spoke and all things were. Now let's get to the humans, the important part. No, God is like, okay, so we're going to have some creatures in the air and some on the ground, and then we're just going to watch them and see what they do for a while. God's like bird watching at the beginning, is so incredibly in love and enamored with creation that I don't know if you can just feel the delight that comes from this passage. And then at the end of that, at the end of Genesis 1, God creates us, beings who are imbued with the ability to also delight in creation, co-workers in creation. It's like this God is so enamored with creation that God has to create an audience. Somebody else to go, ooh, did you see that? Did you see that? Wasn't that incredible? Oh my goodness. And then the story of creation is so good. It is so wonderful. It is so beautiful. It is so worthy that the people who edited Genesis together included a second creation myth. That's different from the first one. I don't know if you've ever studied Genesis 1 and 2. They don't line up. They don't even sound the same. The days don't line up. None of it, because they're two different stories. The Hebrew people were so enamored with God's original goodness that they were like, ooh, that was good. Let's do another. Let's do a second verse. Okay. Our Bible starts with two different creation stories, not to confuse the reader, but to emphasize how good it is, that it's worth telling twice. The Hebrew people who told these stories were a people who delighted in nature, who looked out at the world and were just absolutely enamored with it. They weren't conquerors who subdued chaos and formed order. They were gardeners who named the creatures and who formed order. They were caretakers and mystics who literally walked with God in Genesis 2. And I think we Christians get it twisted. Christianity that we have inherited was born in Rome. It was forged in the fortresses of Europe, and it is steeped in the blood of dissidents. Ours is a religion that has become centered around the violence of the cross and the eradication of bad behavior that necessitated it. For Christians, the Bible begins in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve eat that forbidden fruit and all the bad things happen. Not in the ecstatic delight of its creator. If our creation stories reveal who we are and who we want to be, then I think we need to reimagine some new stories. Recently, I've been trying to learn from the wisdom of the Lenape people, because I figure if there's been a people who have lived in this land for tens of thousands of years, then the land has formed them and has given certain wisdom to those who call this place home. But I have been very frustrated with the fact that there's really no books out there written by actual Lenape people. The books that are out there are written by people who talked with Lenape people, not written by the people themselves. And I learned that that's by design. They are actually forbidden to write down their sacred stories. Because once they write down a sacred story, the words become the authority, not the person in whom the wisdom dwells. Once a wisdom tradition is written down, it stops growing. It becomes static and unchanging. But they are a people so steeped in the wisdom of nature that they know that just as seasons change and nature adapts, so must we. So their sacred wisdom is contained within those who know it, who respect it, and who can reinterpret it for changing times. As Jesus said in John 3, the Spirit blows wherever it wishes. You hear its sound, but you don't know where it comes from or where it's going. It's the same with everyone who was born of the Spirit. So I would like to challenge you this week to take some time in self-reflection and examine the creation stories that you tell, both about yourself and about others. How does your creation story begin? Does it center around what you are fighting against or what you are striving for? Maybe, if you have time, write down your life story in 2 pages or so, and then look for themes that come up, repeated words. Likewise, ask yourself, where do our societal stories start? Because where we start our stories matters. As the Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie so wisely explained, that if we start the story of African Americans on the slave ships, then it will always be a story cloaked in tragedy and sapped of power. Likewise, if the story of white history is only ever told in terms of rulers and battles, we will never transcend our cycles of violence and subjugation. We need a better story, one that embraces Dr. King's inescapable web of mutuality. We need a story that acknowledges our common ancestry and our shared fate. We need to tell a better story about our world, and honestly, I think that starts with the stories that we tell about ourselves. So what do you think? Where does your creation story start? Where does it dwell? Either your own personal story or the story you tell about the world.